Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wonderful people wherever you are. It is February 2025, so that means it's time to recap all the books I read in January. And I was kind of on a bender. I read 10 books in January. It might be the most books I've ever read in a month. Let's just jump right in with the first one. I started the month off by reading Duel in the Dark by J. Allen. This is a military sci-fi. Military sci-fi with like spaceship fights and fleet fights are maybe my favorite genre, but they are very rare. Jack Campbell's Lost Fleet series is a favorite of mine, and because of that, I'm always kind of chasing that high. I've also been enjoying Ian Douglas's Star Carrier series, and so I was looking for more of the same when I was looking for this one. This is the first of J. Allen's Blood on the Stars series, which has, I think, like 15 books, has a lot of books. And so I was really excited for this one, and I came away a little bit disappointed. If you've seen last week's video, I've gone into it a bit deeper, but this is essentially a book about three warring factions. There are the very good democracy, yay, freedom, hurrah, goody good guys, the super evil fascist, very clearly the very baddie bad guys, and the still pretty bad militaristic, not as bad as the other guys, but still pretty bad baddie bad guys. And the characters are super generic sci-fi characters, you know, Starship Commander who doesn't think he should be in his position but is actually respected by his crew and is fantastic. You've got tough as nails first officer, you've got the maverick hotshot pilot, you've got the gung-ho marine, you've got the hardy engineer, and it's just full of these sort of characters. You've got characters that are waving the biggest death flag I think I've ever seen in media. The characters and the dialogue are very, very obvious, very, very generic, pretty disappointing. But the actual combat, the actual spaceships fighting, in this one it's two big capital ships having a fight, a duel in the dark, roll credits. I think I made that joke last week. And the actual combat between the two of them is really enjoyable, and the political situation is just interesting enough that I'm gonna keep going. I've actually started book 2 now. It'll probably be the first book I finish this month, just to, you know, mirror January and February. And so far it has basically all the same problems, but slightly more interesting, and so I'll get into that a bit later. But for now, Duel in the Dark probably gets about a 2 out of 5. It is just interesting enough for me to keep going with, but only because it's in a niche genre that I really like and I struggle to find books for. Up next, I read a book for my bingo list. This book will have a video coming out very shortly. This was The Adventures of Amina Al-Sirafi by Shannon Chakraborty. This is the story about a retired lady pirate who was once the scourge of the Indian Ocean and who is now retired with her family, being picked up and hired for one last job. And she's getting the family back together for one last job. You know, that kind of generic thing. But it's the setting, it's the cultures and the characters that make this book really fascinating. It's set in the Indian Ocean, it's set around the Middle East, India, North Africa, and it just drips culture and theme and setting off of every page. And then the diversity that's here is fascinating. Our main character is a trying to be devout Muslim lady who was a pirate, and she's struggling with that. And I feel it would be too easy to make this book and have it be just like a misplaced Englishman privateer, Portuguese privateer, a white guy that's here doing all this stuff. But they didn't. They went with characters that feel authentic. They clearly researched the area really well. It is this fascinating story about trying to track down a kidnapped lady, and the antagonists along the way are fantastic. The story along the way is fantastic. I have some issues, but I'll go over them in the review video, but overall, The Adventures of Amina Al-Sirafi gets a 4 out of 5. It was really good. Next, the book that I was most disappointed in this month, one that I really wanted to like because it sounded fascinating. The author seems like a lovely person, and I never like talking ill about anyone's work, but it was Lost Souls by Ryan Skeffington. This is a story about the remnants of humanity that have been exiled from Earth due to some cataclysm in the past. I believe it was aliens killing them, and are now living on a series of rings around a central facility. And this is a story about class struggle and about equality and about the downtrodden, the impoverished being given their champion and trying to lead a rebellion. And it feels kind of by the numbers at points. The biggest issue being that while the actual plot, while the actual story points are all really well done, the dialogue and sort of the moment-to-moment writing just wasn't there for me. This book is interesting enough, and these characters are just interesting enough, and the plot is fascinating enough that I will read book 2 when it comes out, and I will really hope that it hits me better, because I want to like this series. I want to like this book. If just for this one I didn't, and it'll get a 1 out of 5 from me. Up next is perhaps my book of the year already. This book was just phenomenal, and that was Babel by R.F. Kuang. By R.F. Kuang. I don't think I need to talk about Babel. I think everyone has already talked about Babel. I don't need to babble about Babel. But this is a story about colonialism. This is a story about complicity, about people being torn away from their colonies, and about the resources, in this case skilled young translators, being ripped away from their colonies to help support and prop up the colonial power that is then being used to further crush resistance, further crush hope, and further crush the economies of their homelands. And it just is written so fantastically. I would read a 7-part series based in this world. It is just fascinating. Our main character, Robin, is constantly at odds with himself, wanting to do what's best for his homeland, while also knowing that he's loving his life in Oxford, loving his life at the Babel Translation Institute, loving the life that being this sort of upperclassman Englishman at this point is affording him, but being at odds with that at all times. And it's just written so well. It wears its opinion on colonialism on its sleeve, which is fantastic. Honestly, there will be a review video for this one coming up, because I genuinely think it might be a contender for the best book I read all year. This is a 5 out of 5. Next, I read In the Shadow of Their Dying by Michael R. Fletcher and Anna Smith Spark. This book was also fantastic. This is a story about a group of criminals, essentially, that are inside a city that is at siege. The surrounding army uses like fell magics, uses artillery, constantly attacks the wall, and doesn't let anyone escape. Meanwhile, there is an assassin who has been hired by this group of criminals to try and kill the king within the city, with the promise that they will be allowed to leave the city if they accomplish this. There is also a demon character in this, and there are chapters from the demon's perspective, and they are written so brilliantly. They are so alien, so weird, initially very hard to pass, because it's writing in a thought pattern that is just so inhuman. I don't know if I'm going to do a video for this book, because I don't know how much I can talk about this book. It's very short. It's very good. I definitely recommend it. This is another 5 out of 5, and I loved reading this one. Up next, another fantastic book. I've had some really good books this month. It is Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. I went into this book knowing absolutely nothing about it. I have the lovely broken binding edition. I will probably do a video review of this one. I'm just a bit nervous about doing so, because this book is so important, I think, that I don't know if I'm good enough at this to make a good review. This is the story about a young woman who lives in a post-economic collapse world, post-economic collapse America. So, you know, probably like 2026, and lives in this walled, gated community, because outside the gates is dangerous. People get robbed and killed and worse constantly. And it is a story about developing a new religion, a new way of life, a new ideology. And it is a post-apocalyptic journey sort of story told in journal entries. And it is just fascinating, terrifyingly prophetic, depressing, sad, hard read. One concern is there is a major age gap in one of the relationships in this book that is very uncomfortable and is at no point kind of called or touched upon, but overall this book's fantastic. It's another 5 out of 5, and if you haven't read it, I really suggest you do. Up next, I read Mr. Magic by Kiersten White. This is the second Kiersten White book I've read. First one I read was Hide, which I thought was really enjoyable. Hide was a story about playing hide and seek in an abandoned amusement park, but it turns out that there's murderers and stuff, and it was really quite good until the end, where it went a little bit off the rails, I thought. Mr. Magic is... Look, if you're kind of around my age, you've been on the internet for as long as I have, you know creepypastas, right? You probably know the creepypasta Candle Cove. It was the inspiration for the first season of Channel Zero, if you've seen that. And this is very clearly based on that. I'm not going to claim that Kiersten White 100% read Candle Cove and then wrote this book. Candle Cove is only like a few paragraphs long, if that. Absolutely, ideas could occur separately, but this very much reminds me of Candle Cove. The idea of this... Candle Cove is a story of children talking about an old TV show they used to watch, and then finding out that the TV show didn't actually exist. This is a story about people talking about a TV show they used to watch that doesn't exist anymore, and some mysterious event that took place. And this is a story following the old cast members of that show. They were children at the time, now they're adults. One of them, our main character, has completely lost all memories of that time, and the cast are coming together for a reunion show, but is very clearly something dark at play, more than meets the eye here. And it was quite good. Very quickly, I started to get this sort of religion vibe, this sort of culty vibe from it. And getting to the acknowledgements page and finding out that yes, Kiersten White did grow up in a Mormon family and in that sort of Mormon church, and this book seems to be sort of their way of dealing with that and dealing with leaving that lifestyle. And it was really good. It was better than I thought it was going to be. This is a book I'd actually picked up before, read the first page and been like, oh, it's just Candle Cove, never mind, and put it down. But actually, I've read it now and it's not just Candle Cove. And in fact, it takes sort of the inspiration from Candle Cove and I think does a much better job with it than Channel Zero, the TV show, did. And it is genuinely a little bit creepy at times, but mostly it's just kind of like a mystery story. And it has a satisfying conclusion, it has satisfying reveals, and I really did enjoy it. It also has an amazing cover. Mr. Magic is a 4 out of 5. Up next, I basically never read books the year they come out. I never even normally get close, mostly because when books come out, they're in this giant, paperback size or hardcovers, and I normally generally like to wait for the normal sized books. But in this case, I saw it in the bookstore, I was pulled towards it, and I picked it up. I read Witchcraft for Wayward Girls by Grady Hendrix. This was a very brave book for Mr. Grady Hendrix to write. This is a book about young pregnant women in the late 60s, early 70s in a very conservative sort of America. It was very brave to write this as a, middle-aged white hetero, I think, male, not really having that much experience in this world, but he's done a fantastic job. This feels genuine, this feels fantastic. This is the story about Fern, that's her name given to her at the maternity home, who as a teenager has fallen pregnant and has been sent off to this home usually run by nuns and whatnot, to atone for her sins, give birth, the child will be adopted away and she can return to her life and forget that any of this ever happened. And this is a story about power, about taking the power away from these girls. This is a story about blame. These girls are blamed for this. These girls' lives are destroyed in parts by this. And the men who are involved, who are just as equal a part of this, completely off scot-free. Many of these girls are here because coming out as pregnant would ruin these boys' lives. And so they're sent to this home. They're sent away from humanity to hide away while these men get to keep playing college football. These men get to keep preaching at churches. These men that were equal parts, if not more responsible in some cases, just get to go on with their lives. And the book is more infuriating than it is horrifying. There are horrifying images here, but mostly this is a book that just makes me angry, especially angry at the world. In a post-Roe vs. Wade world, I think this is an important book to read because I think we could too easily end up back in a situation like this. The story revolves around Fern and her friends at this home finding a book about witchcraft and then using that to kind of alter the balance of power. The horror elements are not as strong as some of the other horror books I've read, but genuinely this book would have just worked as a general fiction book without any of the horror elements, and it was powerful enough that I cried at some bits, and it was just such a powerful, moving book that it gets a 5 out of 5. The penultimate book was Ocean's Echo by Everina Maxwell. I have a review up _. This is the first romance book I've ever read. I'm not certain it was a romance book. This is a story about two men who are supposed to be, they're meant to have their minds merged so one of them can control the other one, but neither of them want to do it, so they pretend that they've done it. So this is kind of like a fake dating, but it's fake mind control. And mostly it's just kind of like a sci-fi political thriller set around kind of a military coup. And the sci-fi political elements are fantastic, and I actually thought the romantic elements are fantastic. I just think the two of them kind of grate at each other. Neither of them have enough room to breathe, to expand, and to really get going where they need to go, because they keep constantly being interrupted by the other elements. Overall, this one gets a 3 out of 5 though. It was very, very good. And finally, I read Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. I didn't know going in this was a YA book, but it was very apparent very quickly that it was. I don't know if I've read a book before where I adore the world building, I adore the story, I adore the plotting, I adore the prose, I adore everything except for our main cast of characters, who I find to be just petulant, naive, spunky YA protagonists who annoy the ever-living crap out of me. But that being said, I enjoyed the book. This is a story about a set of remnant humanity again. These ones are trapped underground on a planet that is defended by these big rings of defense satellites, and they are being attacked by a mysterious alien force called the ℙ𝕚𝕚𝕚. Their only way of defense is with these starfighters that act in atmosphere in a very interesting and not altogether enjoyable way sometimes, but most of the actual dogfighting is great. And this is the story about Spencer. She's a young girl whose father was a coward. Her whole family's been branded cowards as she tries to pass the test to become a pilot and get her way through flight school. It has a very generic YA feel. It very much feels like other YA books and YA media I've read before, but there's something about Brandon Sanderson's writing style that just captivates me. The prose here is easy. It's YA, but Brandon Sanderson's prose is often very easy anyway, so I don't feel like it feels YA in that way. It just feels YA with the sort of naive cast of characters. I kept expecting like a come to God moment for our character where they would realize that their viewpoint on the world is just entirely, needs changing and they need to change as a person. I never quite got that to the extent that I wanted. And it doesn't really have the Brandon Sanderson signature Sanderlanche at the end, where, you get to the end of like Mistborn and there's like the last 100 pages of just breakneck pace of things happening that have been set up for a book. This one kind of meandered towards an ending, I thought, with a reveal that quite upset me. I think I need to make a video about this one because I think I want to talk about this a bit more. But overall, this one gets a 3 out of 5, and I liked it enough that I have picked up book 2 and I will keep reading it. Skyward was actually picked for me by my TBR jar. So it is time to pick another one. Rules are whatever the jar picks is what I read at some point in the next month. The only exception being I don't want to pick another long fantasy series because I am currently reading Wheel of Time. Let's see what we get. Let's go with this one. That's 2. Let's grab this one. And we got Earth Core. Earth Core by Scott Sigler. I think that's down there. It is. This is a story about mining in a deep cave. It is exactly the sort of cave story that I really like. I don't recall why this has been on my shelf for so long without being read, but I'm really excited to read it. So I will see you at some point in February with a review of Earth Core by Scott Sigler. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. Let me know what the best book you read in February was. Let me know if you've read any of the books I'm talking about here, and if you want to see review videos for them if there isn't one up already. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to pick up any of the books I've read this month, they're in the description below. If you want to help support the channel, there is an Amazon wishlist link with a list of books that I would love to read and review for the channel, but I just don't have on the shelf right now. But most of all, please just keep watching, and most of all, just keep reading. Thank you.